Welcome everybody to April's podcast, and we're very lucky to be in the fantastic woodland of the Graithwaite estate. And this podcast we are going to be talking about all things pine marten and the fantastic reintroduction project that's been going on to get pine martens back into Cumbria. And I'm joined today, you might hear the dog eating some sticks in the background, but I'm joined today by Mick Mayhew. Mick's from the University of Cumbria, and you've been managing this project, haven't you?
Yes, I've been managing this project since it started in 2019. It started as the Boom project back on our map.
I thought so.
Yeah, so we did elements of it through Boom, and then it sort of morphed into what's now the South Cumbria Pine Marten Recovery Project, and I lead that.
Fantastic. And then John Beardsley from the...
Forestry England.
Forestry England. Go on, John, you tell us your job title.
I'm Wildlife Ranger,
Brill.
based at Grisdale.
Brill. And are you the Forestry England's lead in this area on the pine marten reintroduction?
No, I wouldn't say so. No,
Okay.
I mean, it's just kind of locally involved with the project.
But John has vastly more expertise than anyone else, any of his other colleagues, let's put it that way.
We're also joined by Julia, who used to work in the gardens at Plumgarth and now works in the Upper Dudden wilding project. Tell us a bit about what you do, Julia.
So I've recently started for the Upper Dudden Landscape Recovery Project, and I'm in the process of setting up a small nursery at Dalehead in the Dudden Valley, and hope to be up and running soon, growing wildflowers and trees for the project and involving volunteers.
And tell us a little bit about your involvement with the pine martens then, because you've been involved for quite a while, haven't you?
Yes, so I initially was a volunteer for the Back on Our Map project, so I met Mick that way, working on butterflies, dormice, plants, and then I had a call to ask me if I would like to be a volunteer on one of the pine marten survey weeks up in Scotland. So I jumped at the chance. Fantastic. And that's how I got involved initially.
Excellent. And you've all just been up to Scotland looking at pine martens and checking out the donor populations, making sure they're okay.
Yeah, we have. So, I mean, we're sort of almost at the tail end of the project now, in the sense that we did 2.5 years of feasibility, and since then, under license, we've had 2 translocations of just shy of 30 animals, and they're doing very well. And we're now at a point where, under license from Nature Scott, they're asking us to go back to the donor area and just resurvey that area to check that the population is recovering. So we've been up there for the last couple of weeks, and had a wonderful time. We sort of deploy camera traps, collect pine marten scats, and it seems that most of the locations where pine martens were trapped and removed in September 24 are now reoccupied by other animals.
Fantastic. So, John, just tell us about what a pine marten is.
It's a member of the mustelid family, so anybody that's familiar with kind of ferrets will have an idea of what they kind of look like, or mink. But they're much more leggy, which is due to the arboreal nature. So they've got powerful limbs for climbing, quite thin-bodied for getting into small nooks and crannies. A reddy brown colour for the main coat, quite big and fluffy looking in their winter coat, very sleek and shiny in their summer coat, got a ruddy chestnut colour, with a white to yellow bib, which is their distinctive feature, which will set them apart if you see them out and about.
That must be really handy, having a feature that you can tell individual adults from.
Yeah, the bibs they're supposed to be unique, but we have found that there are some that are very, very similar when you start looking at them. Whether that's a familial thing, I don't know, but some of them do look quite similar. But yeah, they are pretty unique, especially if you can get them in daylight. There's a bit of a difference on the night shots to the day shots.
Are they mainly nocturnal?
Mainly nocturnal,
okay.
Mainly, but we are getting some out in the daytime, different times of the year. I believe sort of during this time of year now, when the females are hunting when they're lactating, that they need to hunt more, so they're out and about a bit more.
You met one in Scotland, didn't you? Feeding on frogs in the middle of the day.
But yeah, marten had popped out of a drain mid dining on a frog, dropped its frog and ran off. And they frequently visit sort of bird feeders and things, so people will see them in their gardens, quite possibly. But as for body size from nose to tail, it was just saying they're about 65 centimetres. Females are a bit smaller. We were finding the females were weighing about 1 to 1.2 kilos and males up to 2 kilos, which is hard to see when they're an individual animal. But if you ever get a pair on camera, you can say, oh God, yeah, that's a lot bigger than that one.
Yeah.
So they're quite easy to tell that way. The youngsters tend to be leaner and slimmer and have quite a thin tail. And then as they become more adult, their tails get more bushy. There's a little bit of colour through it, a bit of black or a bit of dark highlights and things, but they're generally uniform in colour. And about the size of a small cat.
Right. Fantastic, thank you. I wanted to just fundamentally start with why we reintroduce species. So why pine martens disappeared in the first place, and then why do we want to put them back?
You've got to remember that pine martens and all sorts of other extinct or endangered species have been kicking around since the end of the last glaciation, right? For thousands and thousands of years, pine martens were found almost from John O'Groats to Land's End, and the fact that they were pushed to the brink in Cumbria and other parts of the UK, I mean, all of that has happened in the blink of an eye, really. But fundamentally, they were persecuted, they were shot and trapped and poisoned through the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly with the rise of game shooting estates. I guess by the end of the 19th century, the populations had declined substantially. But actually in Cumbria, they sort of clung on in reasonable numbers right through until maybe the late 60s, early 70s. Right. Yeah. So if you speak to some of the older landowners and farmers around here, and foresters, they'll tell you that they remember small numbers of pine martens, probably a small breeding population through to the sort of 70s. And then there was this very steep decline towards extinction after that.
Right.
I'm not sure I don't think they were ever completely extinct in Cumbria, so strictly speaking what we're doing is a population reinforcement rather than a reintroduction, but they were perilously close to it.
Right, and then that fundamental thing then, why do we want to put species back into the landscape?
Well, because they belong. In Cumbria you've got anything with a prefix, a mart prefix, mart Beald, mart Crag, Martindale. There's plenty to remind us that these animals were present. And they're good for people and they're good for landscapes, right? So pine martens play a really fundamental role in forest ecosystems. They balance populations of small mammals. They're brilliant at dispersing seeds. They have this fantastic and well-publicised impact on red and grey squirrels.
For this, but there's so much involved with bringing back a predator like pine martens that you can't do it within a 4 or 5 year period.
So the scientific feasibility work was built into the Back on Our Map, or the BOOM project. And when we started it, there was no remit to do anything beyond that, because we always recognised the size of a predator reintroduction and that it would require sort of additional funding, a larger regional partnership and so on. But as the feasibility work progressed and we started looking at results, we were just pleasantly surprised. And so it dawned on us that, okay, maybe we can move this from theory and science into implementation. And so in 2023, at the end of BOOM, a group of us came together. We tried to find funding. We submitted a license. And everything went horribly wrong. Right? Because basically the authorities and various organisations were not terribly enamoured with the fact that this lesser known university in the north of England was embarking upon a full-blown translocation. And so the licence was turned down, the funding expired, and at the end of 2023 we all sort of decided we should wrap it up and walk away, and there were
I didn't realise.
there were one or two really committed characters, like a chap called Dr. Andy Jennings, who works with us, who just said, look, we need to dig deep and get going and keep this going. So in 2024 we reapplied to lottery, new funding came in, we recruited a small team, and everything changed because the statutory organisations recognised that we had staying power, that we weren't going away, and that we were going to see this through.
One of the things I was reading was this whole idea that pine martens had already started to move into Cumbria from the Kielder kind of borders area. You know, I saw some of the modelling maps of this is what we think where we'll be with introductions, and this is what we think where we'll be without introductions. So there was obviously an acceleration of, you know, spreading that pine marten population.
Kielder is obviously the nearest population, and we always knew from our mapping and modelling outputs that there was the potential for animals from the Kielder population to find their way down the Eden Valley, nip across at Penrith into the lakes and end up in South Cumbria. But we also recognised that there were all sorts of barriers and obstacles to the movement of those animals. You know, the M6 big rivers, mink traps along the rivers, spring traps in the Pennines, whatever. So the output suggested to us that it would take 25 or 30 years. Individuals would find their way down before too long, but to end up with a viable breeding population would take decades. And there was a sort of sense of urgency in the team, really, and we just thought, look, there's a lot that we could miss out on during those 20 years. We'll all be dead by then. The red squirrels may be extinct by then. The woodlands could be damaged by grey squirrels, whatever. You know, there are all sorts of reasons to justify more swift sort of
that acceleration of
action.
Something that we thought was going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Or we hoped was going to happen anyway. That's brilliant. John, of all the pine martens that have been reintroduced, come from the same area in Scotland?
No, the first cohort came from Sutherland, centred around sort of Lake, Bonnybridge kind of area, from as far north as wild wastes of the Flow country, down as far as Alness. Private estate there were very generous in letting us have access to their estate. And then the second year, last year, was sort of two areas really, which were fairly close together, along the Murray coast, so from Nairn to Lossiemouth, and then a strip going south of Inverness, down the A9 for a short way, and then down along the sort of south shore of Loch Ness.
Are we interested in kind of genetic diversity there?
That's the reason for it. To spread them out. So we've got a bit of diversity there. How much there actually is, I don't know. From what I've read and believe, that pretty much all the pine martens have come from the northwest of Scotland.
Is it thought that those original pine martens that had clung on in the northwest of Scotland were in suboptimal habitat?
Yeah, I mean it's sort of wet and soggy out there with little bits of
cold as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's cold and wet, and these little fragmented blocks of Atlantic rainforest. But yeah, they clung on, and I think probably the plantation forestry will have helped them quite a bit, give them a lot of cover.
They're not just a woodland species, are they? I saw a pine marten once in hazel scrub in the Burren.
Right.
You know, and there isn't a lot of trees in the Burren, but they had one of those clinging on populations of pine martens in this kind of crazy hazel scrub in these hollows, and like you were saying about, because even quite a lot of our woodland is quite even aged and has been managed over time, hasn't it? Even if it's not, you know, plantation conifers, we still lack holes in trees. You know?
I mean, there's always that conception of the an untidy forest is something to be cleaned up and tidied up and made to look neat, and I think the Commission has been guilty of that quite a bit in the past. Fortunately, it's kind of changing that way. We recognise now the need for deadwood and some mess. There's talk now locally about leaving some sort of blocks of windblow with the storms we've had. It's been recognised that that kind of tangle is very good for wildlife in general and for pine martens. They use the root plates. For
Julia and I are involved in a wood that's one of our reserves, and that storm Arwen took the middle out of that wood. And when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh my God, this is awful." But now I just think it's ace. it's really, you know. And there's so much dead wood in that wood now, you know.
And I think I read somewhere that you won't find a marten more than 50 metres from a tree. But when we were talking to the keepers in Scotland, they said they regularly see them right out on the hill, miles from a tree.
And like you were saying before about crags, walls, you know, log piles. They're not always. They don't necessarily just need a hole in a tree, do they? They use other habitat for.
As long as it's warm and dry, I suppose that'll suit their purposes. Really, they have a reputation for going into roof spaces, occupied or not. Sometimes we haven't had any instance of that here yet, but I'm sure it will come. Of martens taking up sort of space in people's attics.
Wow.
Causing all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
So anybody does have issues with them. We've got licensed individuals that can go around and sort of pick up any animals that may be injured or sick or in places where people don't want them. But I think from a legal aspect, if they do take up residence in your attic and they are having sort of kits there, then there's not a lot you can do about them.
Chuffed with it.
Just have to
Run
be
with it.
pleased with it. Yeah.
What's the practicalities behind going up there to trap these animals and then bring them back here and let them go?
Last year we basically had a core trapping team which stayed on site for the whole month. The criteria last year was healthy adult animals, not too young, not too old. Bringing them actually down in a vehicle has had some
So you put
some
them in your
adventure.
car?
As I said, we had a van which was kitted out into sort of 4 little compartments.
So they have to be kept individually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
can't put
obviously.
them together.
Yeah,
So we had a van which was kitted out with sort of 4 compartments, which each would take just a cat carrier essentially. Getting them from a trap into there was also quite an adventure. But we got them in the end eventually last year anyway.
So there's quite a lot of trapping effort
There
has
was a
to
lot of
go
trapping
in.
effort.
They're not the easiest things to catch.
Surprisingly, no, because they come readily. They come readily to like the tea sniffers and things. But it's that last 8-9 inches
Yeah.
from the doorway into the back of the trap.
Yeah.
Some will go in readily. They'll just kind of walk straight in. Poof. We were checking every morning, closing the traps down, and then going back out at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon and resetting them live for that evening, and then back out first thing in the morning and checking them.
Trapping was the fun bit, really, wasn't it?
It was.
I mean, the whole translocation process is a mixture of kind of exhilaration and stress, I would say.
can imagine. Well, I can't actually.
As soon as you have that animal in a cage, you've got 4 or 5 days before wild release when they become your responsibility, and you've got to get them through anaesthesia and transport and soft release. And wild animals react to stress in a completely different way to domestic animals, really.
Yeah.
It felt like a burden from the moment you had them until they were
yeah.
safely out in the woods in the release area.
There's a big difference from individuals as well. Some were laid back, and I'm certain some of them you could have just took out there and kept them as a pet.
Yeah.
Others are just wild,
Yeah,
And then you get the odd couple which just look like they're going.
bitten.
I didn't get bitten, but somebody did.
Yeah, I was bitten. Right. Went through my thumbnail, came out the other side. Yeah.
Wow. So you bring them down from Scotland. You're in somewhere like we are now, in a beautiful woodland on Graithwaite or on Grisdale or wherever. What happens then? How do you release them?
Well, we've got 4 pens.
How long do they stay in the pens before they're released?
About 2 days.
Okay.
But we did find that sometimes just being captive was causing stress.
Yeah, yeah.
Some took to it fine. They were quite happy and they'd eaten their food and lying up in their little box.
Yeah.
But others were not so happy in the pen. And in that case, you're better off just opening the door and let them go, because it's the containment that was causing the stress. So
Yeah.
just open the door, let them go.
Yeah,
And then subsequently, because they were collared, we found that they've done all right. They've gone out into the wild and they've been fine. So
Do they revisit the den boxes and the pens then, or once they're gone, are they gone?
Generally gone, but we did have one male who left and came back a couple of hours later to pick up his squirrel. He'd left his squirrel, and he wanted it, so he came back for that. And then we had that storm was right in the middle last year, and we had a marten that left and then came back to the pen to weather out the storm.
Right.
So yeah,
Clever.
so they're not dull. No,
Yeah.
they're not dull.
So, but I want to bring Julia in now. Julia, tell us a little bit about how you got involved and what you've learned.
Well, yes, like I say, I got involved through the Back on Our Map project initially, and then I was asked to go and do one of the first survey weeks up in Scotland, and I've been going back every year since. I've done about 6 weeks now. I think I've done 4 of the surveying and I went up for the trapping as well. 2 weeks of the trapping and transporting animals back to Cumbria.
And the surveying then, that's to check that the populations you're taking animals from are robust?
Yes, yeah, to make sure there's enough pine martens there that we could safely take some of them. So that involves doing scat transects, walking, is it a kilometre transects or a kilometre and a half? Quite often long forest tracks, looking for scat and using the camera traps to identify individual martens from their bib markings. So yeah, and continuing to do that work here in Cumbria. So I'm still monitoring some cameras in Cumbria.
So John mentioned tea
sniffers.
sniffers. That's it.
Yeah. So yeah, we've got one behind us actually in the woods. So a tea sniffers, it's made of like drainage pipe, would you say? Made into a PVC pipe, made into a T shape, and then we place bait on the back of the tea sniffer to encourage the pine martens to stand upright against the tea sniffer to show the bib. So yeah, so you put the food at the back, and then you have a camera on a tree opposite, about 3 meters away, to record what visits.
Go on, what do you bait them with? Because I have been with you when we baited.
Yeah, so peanut butters are one of the big baits that we use, and then usually we add extras, blueberries, peanuts and raisins, sardines inside the tube, sometimes mainly for the scent, because obviously that'll bring them in from quite a long distance away. And magic ingredient is Thai fish sauce.
I was going to say, because I've got some at home that I was going to give to you.
Oh, right.
That we don't use. Excellent. So how many, you're monitoring tea sniffers now as a volunteer. You've got one in one of my woods. So how many are you looking after?
Oh, well, I've only got 3, and I do that as a volunteer on the weekends now. But I really, really enjoy doing it. I mean, obviously it's really exciting to get pine martens visiting, but there's all sorts of other wildlife that you see that, it's just sort of a little window into the woods, see things that you don't normally see. Lots of deer, foxes, and lots of bird life. Yeah, they've had badgers as well, but a woodcock is a really nice one recently. I had 3. I had 3 at once actually, and one of my cameras just at the weekend. But yeah, I think they've been useful for the project overall, really, haven't they, in terms of tracing the dispersal of the martens.
What have we learnt then following them all? What have they all done?
Pine martens, they weigh just over 1 kilo, so about a third the weight of a tomcat, but they're remarkably mobile animals, and that's part of why it's so fascinating to work with the species. So, we had an animal that was released from a pen in Grisdale and travelled 16 kilometres in 3 hours and ended up north of Ambleside. Okay, so they've got enormous capacity for dispersal, which makes them interesting but also very high risk in terms of a species to reintroduce, because they cross all sorts of obstacles and barriers. But they currently occupy 850 square kilometres from east of Windermere all the way through the Duddon, Miterdale, as far as Wastwater, and we've got an animal north as far as Dodwood, and they've now started moving south of the A590 towards Holker and Fowlshaw and those areas as well. So yeah, I mean, we've learned that when you release pine martens, they have an initial dispersal phase where they just travel far and wide. They try and find their own kind, but they're still solitary and territorial. So they try and find an area where there are other pine martens, but with a vacant patch where they can establish a home range and a territory within that. That often takes 4 or 5 weeks, and that's the sort of high-risk period post-release. And then they become much more predictable and settle on a home range. But John and Julia will tell you, they're within that sort of textbook description, if you like. There's all sorts of random occurrences as well. So we've had females this year and last year that have travelled very long distances just before the breeding season that we don't completely understand, when they should have been settled near a den site and so on. So
the one last year was a female we called Petzel, but she went to Grasmere and then moved from Grasmere towards Broughton Mills, just randomly, right at the time when she was about to have kids. But then initially we found out that the male that also covers a long distance, and he visits Broughton Moor quite a lot, was probably known to her, because they were both caught very very close together. And we are wondering whether she picked up his scent on the wind, and she's been settled ever since, and he keeps visiting every sort of few days. He turns up. But he's going all the way from Rusland to Broughton Mills several times a fortnight. Yeah.
There's such a fantastic block of woodland, isn't there, in this part of South Cumbria? I mean, obviously they've spread much further as well now, and they've gone over the fells, like you say, and into different valleys. But I mean, we're very lucky to have this
The densest populations are still in Grisdale and on Graithwaite in the Rutland Valley, that's for sure. Right. And you're dead right, that's all to do with the fact that way back in the feasibility years, we started by looking at forest area and forest connectivity, and then started doing various modelling exercises, which is all about looking at the sort of landscape characteristics of areas with pine marten occupancy and looking for similar areas that are currently unoccupied. Yeah. It was very clear to all of us, even at an early stage, that this sort of forest network that included Grisdale and Graithwaite was the clear contender to host a reintroduction. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But yeah, I'd really like to touch on the squirrels question because this has fascinated me since I first heard about it and heard about this woman who was doing the study from Galway University, wasn't it, about the spread of pine martens within Ireland and how, as the pine martens spread, the grey squirrels disappeared at a rate that the pine martens could not eat them. The grey squirrels seemed to disappear, and then the red squirrels, if there were red squirrels there, would then take up occupancy in those places. So in Ireland, there's been this massive increase in red squirrels. So pine martens seem to be doing something that is doing really well for red squirrels.
That's been our findings as well when we've done the survey work, is that with the exception of mice and voles on the tea sniffers, the two most common mammals that we get are pine martens in the night and red squirrels during the day. There's been a lot of concern with the squirrel groups locally. The marten's going to come and kill everything, whether it be red or grey. And don't get me wrong, they will. If they can get hold of a red squirrel, they'll kill it. They'll eat it, absolutely they will. But for whatever reason, they seem to be a much more difficult prey for them.
That 10,000 years of evolution that you mentioned earlier, Mick, living side by side one another.
I didn't realise myself that red squirrels were reintroduced to the far north of Scotland.
That's really reassuring, actually. Yeah. And they're putting red squirrels back into areas where there's really healthy populations of pine martens. Yeah. So they've gone from zero to healthy populations of red squirrels as well now. So
I think it was about 30 individuals were released into a wood with a good population of pine marten, and those squirrels have gone on to sort of breed and expand and link up with other releases to create a much bigger meta population.
Could this be the silver bullet that brings red squirrels back into much of England?
Potentially, but it's part of a suite. The valuable work that the squirrel groups are doing with trapping and shooting is going to be key right the way through. And I think in Ireland even, if there's still quite a lot of grey squirrels around urban areas. Yeah. So I think there'll always be some scope for trapping and shooting, because the guys that are doing a lot of great work at the moment, they certainly help. It's kind of a rough, I wouldn't say, would you say a back of the fag packet kind of calculations we're doing with squirrel activity and marten activity based on the recordings on the tea sniffers.
Oh no, more scientific than that, John.
It's more scientific than that.
But early analysis.
Early analysis. But we essentially we're recording the amount of grey squirrels that we see on the tea sniffer, and then we've looked at, or the university looked at, the correlation between increase in marten activity and any change in squirrel activity. And it's been statistically significant, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a negative correlation between the sort of average detection rates of grey squirrels and pine martens across 50-odd cameras, I think, that we looked at.
Yeah, wow. I must be, I thought it would take about 10 years.
Yeah, but it seems to be having immediate effect.
Immediate effect seems to be, yeah.
Fantastic.
We did have our first lovely, great picture of a pine marten on Graithwaite Estate with a grey squirrel in its chops, which we were pleased about. The first of many, we hope.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right, and what John says is completely true. All tools in the box required, and we're now working extensively with the red squirrel groups. They recognise what they're up against. The relentless expansion of grey squirrels, the struggle they have with funding and recruitment of youngsters to do the control work and so on. But they're still doing fantastic work, and a handful of pine martens ain't going to cut it. These are density dependent impacts. So, as the years go on, we'll see more of an impact from martens on squirrels. But I would say at the moment, probably fairly limited.
Brilliant.
Sorry. It does seem to be early on there seems to be an impact, so it's promising. I mean, my own theory is that they probably raid drays. You know, I don't think they're going to be killing thousands and thousands of grey squirrels, but I think they could snaffle up a nest of sort of baby grey squirrels quite quickly, and obviously that's removed one family. And if they do that time and time and time again in a small area, then it's the breeding capacity of the grey squirrel. I think that they'll impact more than actually killing individuals.
One last question. Just give us a little snapshot of where we are then, where you feel we are with the project at this point.
The project is progressing well, and I think pine martens in Cumbria have a bright future, because we now have a small breeding population, and at least as important, we now have a really robust sort of regional network partnership of organisations who are managing the project, and they have, through the years, they now have experience and all the necessary skills and experience and so on. And even more important than that, as John was alluding to earlier, they also have links. This partnership has strong links with all sectors of the rural community. So, you know, whether a predator reintroduction succeeds or fails is really all about community and the actions of individuals within it.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I'm reasonably confident that, for example, we've substantially reduced the risk to those translocated animals by
The risk of persecution.
The risk of persecution. The risk of malicious incidents, I think, has dropped substantially because we've got networks with hunts and keepers and landowners and so on. But fundamentally, we're at the population is vulnerable. You know, we've got 40, maybe 45 animals out there. Cumbria, you know, the carrying capacity for Cumbria is probably 300 or 350.
Okay. So 45 is the reintroduced adults and then their progeny.
The reintroduced adults from 2 years, that amounts to 29. Then we had the progeny from spring 2025, and we had almost certainly had an unofficial release of 4 or 5 in September, October 2023. So if you pool all of that, you end up roughly with 45 individuals.
Wow, fantastic. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay then, so Mick, tell us a little bit about and how you get your message across to try to bring people with you on the project.
I think most reintroductions, and certainly predator reintroductions, succeed or fail on the strength of the community work that you do. It's as simple as that. If all you do is administer questionnaires and interviews and collate the data and publish it, you've not achieved very much at all. So you've got to prioritize the right stakeholder groups, because ultimately there are people with a much greater stake in the countryside than others with regards to pine martens, because they're the souls who are going to have to live with them once they're released. And apart from anything else, you've got to be really frank and honest with them. So if you cherry pick your information and just saccharine coat everything, they'll go to the internet and drag out all the information they need to oppose you. So with regards to pine martens, you've got to be completely clear that they pose a risk to game birds, for example, but then follow that by a discussion about mitigation methods that are cost effective and that can be implemented by those stakeholders. And that's a much better approach than just pretending that those worst case scenarios won't happen. And you've just got to take heart from what's happened in other places and hope it will happen where you're working as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming out and doing this. I've learned so much. It's just been it's brilliant. Thank you, Mick. Thank you, John, and thank you, Julia. Always a massive thanks to Liz for holding the microphone and thinking about all the questions, and that's been brilliant. And I just wish you all the best of luck for the project in the future, and you know, let's hope that we get this healthy population of pine martens across Cumbria.